Hey, you can't loiter here. This is an employees-only area.
I agree. Perhaps we should change a few rules.
Mr. Thompson, my deepest apologies. We had no idea you were coming in this early.
Arthur Thompson believed that, to truly understand a thing, you had to observe it in its natural state, unnoticed. You couldn't learn about a river by damming it. You learned by sitting on its bank and watching the current flow. It was a philosophy he had applied to everything, from the intricate gears of a failing startup he was considering acquiring to the complex human ecosystems that thrived within the walls of commercial real estate. Today, the river was the cavernous, marble-floored lobby of the Titan Tower, a 60-story monument of glass and steel that, as of 72 hours ago, belonged entirely to him. He was dressed not as its owner, but as an observer, worn-in denim jeans, a plain charcoal t-shirt that had seen better days, and scuffed leather boots that spoke of walking through construction sites, not boardrooms. His graying hair was unstyled, and his face, etched with the faint lines of 1,000 calculated risks, was placid. He stood near a ficus tree, hands in his pockets, simply watching. He watched the ebb and flow of morning traffic. He saw the slight hesitation in a courier's step as he searched for the directory. He noticed the way a flicker in the third overhead light was almost imperceptible, a sign of a ballast beginning to fail. He felt the subtle vibration through the soles of his boots as the express elevator ascended, a faint hum that suggested the rail guides needed lubrication. These were the building's whispers, the little truths it told to anyone patient enough to listen. But someone else was watching, too. From behind the sleek, granite security console, Leo Maxwell saw none of what Arthur saw. Leo didn't see a system. He saw territory. And in his territory, the man by the ficus tree was an anomaly. He didn't fit. He wasn't a suit-clad executive striding with purpose toward the elevators. He wasn't a service worker in a company uniform. He was just standing there, lingering. For a man like Leo, who had only been on the job for 3 weeks, lingering was a synonym for trouble. It was a loose thread in the tightly woven fabric of his new authority. At 29, Leo was a man tightly wound. His uniform, a crisp navy blue blazer with a gold-stitched emblem on the breast pocket, was immaculate. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His short, military-style haircut looked sharp enough to cut glass. He had taken this job at Titan Tower as a step up from mall security, a move he felt finally reflected his true potential. Here, he wasn't just watching for shoplifters. He was the first line of defense for a fortress of commerce. He was a protector of importance, and he needed everyone to know it. He had spent the last 20 minutes observing the man in the jeans. He watched him scan the lobby, his gaze lingering on the ceiling, the elevator bank, the main entrance. To Arthur, it was an assessment. To Leo, it was a casing. He saw a potential vagrant looking for a warm place to loiter, or worse, a scout for something more sinister. Leo's supervisor, a weary man named Dave, had given him the morning brief. Just keep things smooth. Leo, don't go looking for trouble. But Leo believed the opposite. Trouble didn't look for you, it tested you. It crept in when you weren't vigilant. This man was a test of his authority, his observation skills, his command presence. Beneath his rigid posture, a self-righteous fire began to burn. He saw a man who didn't belong, who was disrespecting this temple of success with his very presence, with his casual clothes and his quiet, unnerving stillness. This was his chance to make his mark, to show the day shift supervisor that he was sharp, proactive, and not just another warm body filling a chair. Before we delve into the confrontation that would send shockwaves through every floor of this building, An encounter that would redefine the meaning of security within these walls. I need you to do something. If you believe that respect is a currency that should be earned through character, not dictated by a uniform, hit that subscribe button. You need to see how this unfolds, because the quiet man by the plant is about to teach a masterclass in power, and the student has no idea class is in session. Leo pushed himself off his stool. He squared his shoulders, adjusted his belt, and began his walk across the marble floor. His footsteps echoed with an intentional weight, each one a drum beat announcing the arrival of authority. The man didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to notice. He just kept watching the light flicker. This, to Leo, was the ultimate sign of defiance. It wasn't just a man loitering, it was a man ignoring him. And in Leo Maxwell's new kingdom, no one was allowed to ignore the king. The air in the lobby was cool and sterile, smelling faintly of citrus-based cleaner and the quiet hum of money being made on the floors above. Arthur Thompson was mentally calculating the cost of retrofitting the building's entire lighting system to high-efficiency LEDs when a shadow fell over him. He didn't need to turn to know he was no longer alone. The deliberate, heavy footsteps had announced the approach a full 10 seconds earlier. He slowly turned his head. His expression not one of alarm, but of mild curiosity, like a botanist examining a new species of insect that had just landed on his arm. In front of him stood the security guard. The man was a study in manufactured authority. His posture was rigid, his chest puffed out slightly, his chin held at a challenging angle. The name tag on his blazer read, L. Maxwell. He had the eyes of a man who wasn't seeing a person, but a problem to be solved. "Can I help you?" Arthur asked, his voice even and calm. It was a voice accustomed to de-escalating tense negotiations and commanding the quiet attention of a boardroom. A voice that never needed to be raised to be heard. Leo ignored the question. It was a nicety, a trap that could lead to a conversation. He wasn't there for conversation. He was there to enforce. "Nay, an kong the lang vangojai, ku vuk nai chi danchon han vien," he said, his tone clipped and dismissive. He gestured vaguely with his thumb towards the main entrance, a clear order to leave. It was a lie, of course. The main lobby was a public access area, a thoroughfare for hundreds of visitors, clients, and couriers every day. But it was a lie Leo felt entitled to tell. It was a tool to quickly and efficiently remove an undesirable element. Arthur's eyes flickered from the guard's face to the name tag, then back. He memorized the name instantly. Maxwell. He noted the slight tremor in the man's hand, a telltale sign of adrenaline overriding training. He saw the body camera on his chest, its small green light indicating it was active. Good. He let a small, almost imperceptible smile touch the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but of recognition. He had seen this type of man before, the small tyrant, intoxicated by the first taste of meager power. "Toi Jong-yi," Arthur said, his voice still gentle. The response caught Leo off guard. He had expected an argument, a denial, a plea. Agreement was not on his flowchart of possible reactions. Before Leo could process it, Arthur continued. "Kola chung tanentai joy mot vai qui jin." The words hung in the air, simple, quiet, yet utterly confounding to the guard. They were spoken not as a suggestion from a subordinate, but as a musing from an equal, or perhaps something else. It was like a janitor telling a surgeon, "Perhaps we should try a different incision." The statement was so out of place, so contrary to the power dynamic Leo was trying to establish, that it short-circuited his brain. He stared at Arthur, his mind racing to categorize the man. Was he a wise guy? Was he mentally unstable? Or was he mocking him? His ego, fragile and oversized, chose the latter. This man in the cheap t-shirt was making fun of him. A flush of red crept up Leo's neck. The cold fire of self-righteousness now burned with the hot fuel of personal insult. "Look, buddy, I don't make the rules, I just enforce them," he snapped, his voice a full octave higher than before. "This area is for building tenants and their authorized guests. You're neither. So I'm going to need you to move along." "That's interesting," Arthur said, his gaze drifting past Leo to the flow of people coming and going. "Because I don't see you stopping that woman with the yoga mat or the man delivering a food order. Are they tenants? They're moving with purpose." "They're not casing the joint," Leo shot back, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. He had just admitted his actions were based on a subjective judgment of purpose, not a clear-cut rule. It was a rookie mistake. Arthur's quiet smile widened slightly. He had him. He had just watched the guard dismantle his own premise in under 10 seconds. "So, the rule isn't about being a tenant," Arthur clarified, his tone still conversational. "It's about having what you personally define as purpose. Is that written down in your post orders? I'd be fascinated to see the specific language on that." The man was a lawyer, Leo thought with a jolt of panic, or one of those sovereign citizen types. He was using his words against him, twisting everything. The feeling of being in control was rapidly slipping through his fingers, and it terrified him. He had to regain the upper hand, and there was only one way he knew how. The gentle hum of the lobby's climate control system seemed to amplify the tense silence between the two men. Leo felt the eyes of passers-by on him, their glances quick and curious. He was losing control of the narrative, and his initial power play had been deftly turned against him. The man's calm was a mirror, reflecting his own agitation back at him, and he didn't like what he saw. When challenged, a man like Leo doesn't retreat to reason. He retreats to protocol. Real or imagined, he decided to escalate. This man wanted to play with words? Fine. He would respond with the unassailable weight of official procedure. "Sir, I am the acting security supervisor for this lobby." He lied, hoping the title would add a layer of authority. "My assessment is that your behavior is suspicious. I am now giving you a lawful order to vacate the premises. If you refuse, you will be trespassing." Arthur simply tilted his head. "A lawful order must be based on a law. Officer, not a feeling. Which specific city ordinance or building policy am I violating by standing in a public lobby?" He wasn't just questioning Leo's authority anymore. He was questioning his competence. For Leo, this was the final straw. The condescension, the calm superiority, it was all designed to make him look like a fool. He couldn't let that happen. Not here. Not in his new domain. "That's it. I need to see some identification. Now," Leo commanded, his voice growing louder. He took a half-step closer, invading Arthur's personal space. A classic intimidation tactic. He was trying to use his physical presence to compensate for his crumbling authority. "You are on private property. We have the right to identify anyone on the premises." Arthur didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply held the guard's gaze. "I am going to comply with your request," he said, his voice steady, echoing the controlled cadence of a man who had diffused hostage situations far more volatile than this one. He was consciously choosing his words, knowing they were being recorded by the camera on Leo's chest. "However, my wallet is in my back pocket. I am going to reach for it now. My movements will be slow and deliberate. Is that acceptable to you?" The formality of the statement was another blow to Leo's ego. This wasn't the language of a trespasser. It was the language of someone who knew the dance, who understood the legal ramifications of every single second of this encounter. It was the survival script you learn when you know a misunderstanding can have catastrophic consequences. "Just get the ID," Leo sneered, trying to regain his footing. "Cut the commentary." "The commentary, as you call it, is for your safety and mine, Officer Maxwell," Arthur replied coolly, his hand moving slowly toward his back pocket. He could feel the tension radiating off the guard. The young man was a coiled spring, wound tight with insecurity and a desperate need to be right. He was looking for a reason, any reason, to escalate this to a physical level, a realm where he felt more comfortable, where the nuances of language didn't matter. He had no idea that the man he was treating like a street vagrant had negotiated multi-billion-dollar mergers with men who could crush Leo's entire security company with a single phone call. He had no idea that the man he was harassing had literally approved the budget for the granite flooring Leo was standing on. Arthur retrieved his wallet. It was a simple, worn leather bifold, nothing flashy. He didn't open it. He held it out for the guard. "Here you are," he said. Leo snatched the wallet from his hand, a gesture of dominance. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning for a driver's license. He was ready to run the name, to find a warrant, a prior, anything that would validate his suspicion and justify his actions. He wanted to find a crack in this man's infuriatingly calm facade. He found the driver's license, Arthur T. Thompson, a local address, no restrictions. He looked at the photo, then back at the man in front of him. The resemblance was undeniable. He felt a pang of disappointment. There was nothing here. No criminal record would pop up. The man was just a man. A man with an attitude problem. Leo told himself. "This is you?" Leo asked, his tone dripping with skepticism, as if he had caught him in a lie. "The wallet you are holding would indicate that it is," Arthur replied calmly. "What do you do for a living?" "Mr. Thompson?" Leo pressed, changing tactics. It was a fishing expedition, a question born of frustration. He saw a man in jeans and a t-shirt who spoke with the precision of a lawyer and held himself with the confidence of a king. The pieces didn't add up in his limited worldview. He decided the man had to be hiding something. "How do you get your money?" The question was wildly inappropriate, a clear abuse of his position. It had nothing to do with security. It had everything to do with Leo's need to categorize, to put Arthur back in a box he could understand. And Arthur was about to show him that he didn't fit in any of his boxes. Arthur Thompson's calm demeanor, a placid lake on a windless day, finally showed a ripple. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder, more precise. The guard had crossed a line, not just a professional one, but a fundamental one of human decency. He had made it personal. "Officer," Arthur said, and the word, which he had used with a hint of formal distance before, now carried the weight of a judge about to pass sentence. His voice dropped half an octave, becoming the voice that made hardened CEOs and union bosses sit up straight in their chairs. "My profession and my financial status are not in any way relevant to your duties. You have my identification. You have been informed that I am not in violation of any law. You have yet to provide a legitimate reason for this detainment. I suggest you return my wallet and we can both get on with our day." The shift was unmistakable. The quiet observer was gone. In his place was a man of immense and undisguised authority. The change was so palpable that for a split second, a flicker of doubt, of genuine fear, crossed Leo's face. A smarter man, or a more experienced one, would have recognized this as the final off-ramp on a highway to disaster. He could have handed back the wallet, mumbled an apology about a misunderstanding, and retreated to his desk. He could have salvaged his job, but Leo Maxwell was not a smart man. He was a proud man, and his pride had been wounded. He saw Arthur's words not as a final warning, but as the ultimate challenge. This man was talking down to him, ordering him around. Backing down now, in the middle of the lobby, would be an admission of defeat. He would look weak. He would be the joke of the security staff. His ego couldn't handle it. So, instead of hitting the brakes, he slammed his foot on the accelerator. This is a critical failure point often seen in bad policing and security work, the sunk cost fallacy of ego. He had already invested so much of his authority and credibility into this confrontation that turning back felt like a greater loss than pushing forward into oblivion. He couldn't be wrong. Therefore, the other person had to be the criminal. "I'll decide what's relevant," Leo snapped, his voice tight with manufactured rage. His hand drifted down, resting almost casually on his belt, near his handcuffs. It was a deliberate, theatrical gesture of intimidation. "Right now, I'm observing an individual who is being evasive, argumentative, and uncooperative. That gives me all the reason I need. Now, one last time, get out of my building." "It's not your building, son," Arthur said, his voice now devoid of all warmth. It was flat, hard steel. "And I am not leaving." That was it. The final, irrevocable declaration. The line in the sand had been drawn. Leo saw it as the ultimate act of defiance. He interpreted it as a physical challenge. "Fine," Leo said, a grim smile spreading across his face. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the familiar rush that came before a physical confrontation. This was territory he understood. "You're under arrest for criminal trespass." Arthur almost laughed. "Arrest? You're a security guard, not a police officer. You don't have the authority to arrest me. What you're threatening is called unlawful detainment, and it carries some very serious legal penalties. I am giving you one final chance to walk away from this. Mr. Maxwell, return my property and go back to your desk." He even used the guard's name, a calculated move to remind him that he was not an anonymous uniform, but an individual who would be held accountable for his actions. But Leo was too far gone. He was deafened by the siren song of his own bruised ego. He heard the words unlawful detainment, not as a legal warning, but as more lawyer talk, more fancy words from a man trying to trick him. "You think you're so smart," Leo snarled, pulling his radio from his belt. "We'll see how smart you are when the real cops get here." He keyed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Maxwell at the Titan Tower front desk. I have a 10 to 16, an uncooperative individual, refusing to leave the premises, requesting police assistance." The call was a bluff. He knew it would take at least 15 minutes for a patrol car to arrive for a low-priority call like this. He didn't want the police. He wanted the man to break. He wanted to see fear in his eyes. But as he looked at Arthur Thompson, he saw nothing of the sort. There was no fear. There was no panic. There was only a profound, unsettling stillness. It was the calm of a man who wasn't just waiting for the police, but seemed to be welcoming their arrival. It was the calm of a man who knew exactly how this was going to end. And in that terrifying moment of clarity, a cold seed of dread began to sprout in Leo's stomach. He was beginning to realize that the trap he thought he was setting for this man had, all along, been for him. The crackle of the radio transmission died, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Leo stood his ground, trying to project an aura of control. But the seed of dread was quickly growing into a thorny vine, wrapping itself around his insides. The man, Thompson, hadn't moved a muscle. He simply stood there, a picture of unnerving patience, as if he were merely waiting for a scheduled appointment. A few people who worked in the tower, recognizing a confrontation, had slowed their pace, their curious glances turning into outright stares. The audience was growing, and Leo's bluff was about to be called. He had committed. There was no turning back now. His mind raced, scrambling for his next move. Should he attempt to physically restrain the man? His training manual was a blur of contradictory guidelines. The risk was enormous. But doing nothing made him look foolish. A toothless dog barking at a statue, he was trapped in a paralysis of his own making. It was at that precise moment that the universe chose to intervene. Not with the wail of a police siren, but with the frantic sound of dress shoes slapping against marble. "Hold it! Leo, stand down! For God's sake, stand down!" The voice was shrill, laced with pure, undiluted panic. It was Frank Gable, the building's general manager. Gable was a man in his late 50s, usually impeccably dressed and composed. But the man sprinting across the lobby now was anything but. His tie was askew. A sheen of cold sweat glistened on his forehead, and his face was the color of old parchment. He had clearly run down from his second-floor office after seeing the commotion on a security monitor. He wasn't running like a manager coming to handle a situation. He was running like a man trying to stop a bomb from detonating. Gable skidded to a halt, planting himself between Leo and Arthur. He didn't even look at his security guard. All of his attention, all of his horrified energy, was focused on the man in the jeans and t-shirt. "Thua Ong Thompson, Rat Shin Loy, Moin Goi Kong Biet Ong Se Jen Som Huve," Gable stammered, his words tumbling over each other. He was breathless, his chest heaving. "We had your official welcome tour scheduled for this afternoon with the executive team. I am so sorry for this reception." The world seemed to grind to a halt. The ambient noise of the lobby, the distant chatter, the ding of an elevator, the hum of the HVAC, all of it faded into a dull roar in Leo's ears. He stared, unblinking, at the scene in front of him. Mr. Thompson. The name echoed in the suddenly silent cavern of his mind. Thompson, as in the Thompson Real Estate Group. The global conglomerate that had just bought the entire building. The name on the press releases he had been told to read. The new owner. The man who, in effect, signed his paychecks. The man he had just threatened to have arrested for trespassing. Leo felt the blood drain from his face. His legs felt weak, as if the bones had turned to dust. The confident, authoritative posture he had worked so hard to maintain collapsed inward. He was no longer a guard. He was just a 29-year-old man who had ruined his life in the span of 5 minutes. Arthur Thompson's gaze shifted from the panicked manager to the now frozen guard. His expression remained unchanged, but his eyes were cold, analytical. He gave Gable a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of his apology. Then he spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "It's quite all right, Frank. I decided to come early. I find you learn more about a place when it isn't expecting you." His eyes locked onto Leo's. "I've been learning a great deal this morning." Leo flinched as if he'd been struck. The quiet words carried more force than any shout. He could feel the weight of every bad decision he had just made crashing down on him. The fabricated rules, the illegal demand for ID, the lie about being a supervisor, the threat of arrest, the call to the police, each one was a nail in his professional coffin. "Sir," Leo began, his voice a choked whisper. He didn't know what he was going to say. Apologize? Explain? But what explanation was there? I profiled you because you weren't wearing a suit? I let my ego override my judgment? Give me the wallet. Mr. Maxwell, Arthur said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Leo's hands were shaking so badly he fumbled with the leather bifold. He held it out, his arm trembling, like a child offering a broken heirloom to his father. Arthur took it without a word and slipped it back into his pocket. Then he looked at Gable. "Frank, I believe you, Mr. Maxwell." and I have some things to discuss. Your office, now, and cancel that police dispatch. We'll be handling this internally." The final two words were the most terrifying of all. Handling this internally meant there would be no public report, no official record he could contest. There would only be the quiet, efficient, and absolute judgment of the man he had just tried to eject from his own building. The walk to Frank Gable's office was the longest walk of Leo Maxwell's life. The marble floors that had felt like his kingdom just minutes ago now felt like an executioner's mile. He walked a few paces behind Arthur Thompson and the building manager, his head down, the burning stares of the lobby's occupants feeling like physical blows on his back. The world had been turned upside down. The man in the worn jeans walked with the unassailable confidence of a monarch, while he, in his crisp uniform, felt like a peasant being dragged to the stocks. Gable's office was a space of quiet corporate luxury, mahogany desk, leather chairs, and a large window overlooking the city plaza. But today, it felt like a sterile interrogation room. Gable, still flustered, offered Arthur a chair and a coffee. Arthur declined both. He remained standing, choosing a position by the window where he could observe both men. He was no longer the passive observer. He was in complete command. He had transitioned seamlessly from target to investigator, and the shift was terrifying to witness. "Frank," Arthur began, his voice calm but carrying an edge of tempered steel. "Pull up the security footage from lobby camera 4. I want the full, unedited recording from the moment I entered the building until the moment we walked in here. I want the audio from Officer Maxwell's body camera downloaded and secured. I want his daily activity log, and I want the official post orders for the front desk security contingent. I want them on my tablet before you sit down." The rapid-fire list of demands was precise, clinical. Arthur knew exactly what evidence he needed. He was building a case. Gable, fumbling with his computer mouse, nodded wordlessly. His hands were shaking. He was not just embarrassed, he was terrified for his own job. This level of failure on his watch was catastrophic. Leo stood rigidly in the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back in a pathetic imitation of a parade rest. He didn't dare speak. He didn't dare move. He just watched as the architecture of his doom was constructed, piece by piece. Arthur turned his attention to him. "Mr. Maxwell?" he said, the formal address feeling more like an accusation. "While Frank is gathering that, you can answer a few questions for me. First, what is your official title?" Leo's mouth was dry. "Security officer, sir," he mumbled. "Not acting security supervisor?" Arthur asked, his eyebrow raising a fraction of an inch. Leo paled. "No, sir." "I see. And the policy about this lobby being for employees only. Can you tell me where that is written?" "It's not. Sir, I misspoke." "You didn't misspeak. Mr. Maxwell. You lied. You lied to assert authority you do not possess. Is that a standard tactic you were taught by your employer?" "No, sir." "So it's a tactic you developed on your own?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Arthur let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting the weight of the admission sink in. He was no longer just addressing the guard. He was beginning the autopsy of a systemic failure. He was calm. Not because he wasn't angry, but because his anger had been refined into a tool, a laser-focused instrument for dissecting the problem to its root. The emotional, petty fury that had driven Leo was a child's tantrum compared to the cold, structural anger now emanating from Arthur Thompson. "Tell me," Arthur continued, his voice dangerously soft. "What was it about me that you deemed suspicious?" Leo was trapped. Any answer he gave would be an indictment. If he said it was the clothes, it was profiling, If he said it was the lingering, it was a failure to distinguish observation from malice. You weren't moving, sir. You were just watching everything. It seemed out of place. I was assessing my property, Arthur stated plainly. An owner has the right to assess his property. Did it occur to you to approach me with a simple, "Good morning? Is there anything I can help you find?" as a first step? My training, Leo stammered, his mind grasping for straws. Your training taught you to lead with accusation and threats? Who is your employer? Mr. Maxwell? What is the name of the security contractor this building uses? Apex Security Solutions. Sir. Arthur made a mental note. Apex Security Solutions. Gable finally managed to transfer the video files. It's all here. Mr. Thompson, he said, handing the tablet to Arthur with a trembling hand. Arthur took it and began to review the footage. The office was silent except for the faint sound of the confrontation playing back from the tablet's small speakers. Leo had to stand there and watch his career implode in real time. He heard his own voice, tight with aggression. He heard the man's calm, reasonable responses. He saw his own posture, his hand drifting to his belt. He saw the whole ugly ballet of his failure. But then, on the audio from the body cam, Arthur heard something he hadn't heard in the moment. As Leo had turned away to make the radio call, he had muttered something under his breath. A quiet aside meant only for himself. The tablet's microphone had picked it up with perfect clarity. Broke loser thinks he can talk to me like that. The room went dead silent. It was the final piece of the puzzle. The entire confrontation hadn't been about security. It had never been about suspicious behavior. It had been about class. It had been about a man in a uniform feeling personally offended by the presence of a man in jeans. The motive was no longer just implied. It was recorded. It was explicit. Arthur looked up from the tablet, his eyes boring into Leo. The cold anger had now solidified into something harder, something absolute. "Get him out of my building, Frank," he said, his voice flat. "His access is revoked, effective immediately. Have him escorted to the property line. He is never to set foot in this tower again." The firing of Leo Maxwell was not an ending, it was a beginning. For Frank Gable, it was the start of a desperate attempt to save his own career. For Arthur Thompson, it was the start of a deep dive into the rot he had just uncovered. As a shell-shocked Leo was being escorted out a side entrance by the head of engineering, a man he had condescendingly written up for a minor infraction the week before, Arthur sat down in Gable's chair. He had claimed the seat not as a guest, but as the man in charge. "Frank," Arthur said, gesturing to the chair opposite the desk. "Sit down. The problem isn't just that young man." Gable, looking utterly defeated, sank into the chair. "I know, Mr. Thompson. I am ultimately responsible. I will tender my resignation." "Don't be dramatic," Arthur said, waving a dismissive hand. "I don't need a scapegoat. I need a solution. Resigning is easy. Fixing this is hard. Let's start with the contractor. Apex Security Solutions. How long have they had the contract for this building?" 7 years, sir," Gable replied. "They came in with the previous owners. And in those 7 years, how closely have you monitored their performance, their hiring practices, their training protocols?" Gable hesitated. "We have a weekly meeting with their site supervisor. They submit incident reports. Their contract has a renewal clause based on performance metrics, which they've always met." "Metrics like what?" Arthur pressed. "Number of incidents reported? Response times?" "Yes, primarily," Gable admitted. "Then the metrics are wrong," Arthur stated. "You're measuring activity, not quality. You're rewarding them for writing reports, not for preventing situations that require reports in the first place. I want to see Leo Maxwell's personnel file. Everything. His application, his references, his training certifications, and every single complaint or commendation he's ever received. I want to see the files of his direct supervisors as well. It took the better part of an hour for Apex Security's off-site HR department to reluctantly email the encrypted files. As they loaded onto the screen, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Leo Maxwell had been on the job for 3 weeks at Titan Tower, but he had worked for Apex for 2 years, mostly in retail environments. His file was a tapestry of red flags, all of them ignored. There were 3 separate citizen complaints against him for aggressive language and intimidating behavior. One came from a teenage girl he had accused of shoplifting. Another from a delivery driver he had detained for parking in the wrong spot. The third was from an elderly man he had shouted at for sitting too long on a mall bench. In each case, Leo's report painted himself as the calm professional dealing with a hysterical or uncooperative subject. And in each case, his supervisor at the time, a man named Markinson, had signed off on the report, marking the complaints as unsubstantiated. There was more. His performance reviews were filled with coded language. Phrases like shows initiative and takes a proactive approach were used to describe what was clearly a pattern of overzealous and confrontational behavior. No one had ever corrected him. No one had ever told him to de-escalate. In the culture of his previous assignments, his aggression had been seen as a virtue. He wasn't a bad apple. He was a predictable product of a poisoned tree. "This isn't just about Maxwell," Arthur said, his voice grim as he scrolled through the documents. "This is systemic. His supervisor, Markinson, rubber-stamped these complaints. He promoted a culture where this behavior was acceptable, even encouraged. Where is Markinson now?" Gable typed a few keys. "He was promoted 6 months ago. He's now the regional operations manager for Apex. He's in charge of the security personnel for this entire district, including this building." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The disease wasn't just the soldier on the ground. It was the general. The entire philosophy of the security contractor was flawed. They hired for intimidation, not for service. They trained for confrontation, not for communication. They managed by covering their own liability, not by ensuring the safety and dignity of the people they were paid to protect. "This is what happens," Arthur said, leaning back in his chair and staring out the window. "A company gets a contract, and they focus on the bare minimum. They put a warm body in a uniform and call it security. They don't train them to think. They train them to react. And when you train for reaction, you get overreaction. You get men like Maxwell, who are so insecure in their own authority that they have to create dragons just so they can slay them." Arthur turned back to Gable. "Frank, I don't just want a new guard at the front desk. I want a new philosophy. The culture in this building starts at the front door. The first person a client, a visitor, or a future tenant meets is that person at the desk. That person sets the tone for everything else. For the last 7 years, the tone of this building has been suspicion. It's been a quiet, low-grade hostility. Today, it just happened to boil over." "What are you going to do?" Gable asked quietly. Arthur's face was set like stone. "I'm not going to renew the contract with Apex Security. I'm going to terminate it for cause. And then, we're going to build our own security force. From the ground up, in-house. They won't work for a contractor. They will work for us. They will be part of our team, and their first job won't be to intimidate. It will be to welcome." The decision was made. The fallout would be massive. But for Arthur Thompson, it was the only option. You don't just treat the symptom, you cure the disease. The termination of a 7-year contract with a major regional security provider was not a simple matter. But Arthur Thompson moved with the speed and decisiveness that had defined his career. His legal team found multiple breaches in the Apex contract, citing negligent supervision and a failure to properly vet and train their personnel. Using Leo Maxwell's documented history as the primary exhibit, faced with a public lawsuit from a man of Arthur's stature and resources, Apex Security Solutions folded. They agreed to terminate the contract without penalty, and their regional manager, Markinson, was quietly forced into an early retirement. The blue and gold uniforms of Apex vanished from Titan Tower less than a month after the incident. In their place, Arthur began building something new. He hired a nationally respected security consultant, a former Secret Service agent, to help him design an entirely new in-house security program. The program was called the Ambassador Service, and the name was a deliberate choice. Their new uniforms were not the quasi-military navy blazers of Apex, but professional, well-tailored charcoal gray suits. Their job descriptions were rewritten. Words like enforce and detain were replaced with assist, guide, and ensure. The hiring process was rigorous. Candidates were not screened for their physical presence, but for their communication skills and psychological temperament. Every single applicant underwent situational testing focused on de-escalation. They were taught to see themselves not as gatekeepers, but as facilitators, the human face of the building itself. Arthur personally sat in on the final round of interviews for the front desk ambassadors. He didn't want another Leo Maxwell, a man propped up by a fragile ego and a cheap blazer. He wanted men and women who possessed an innate, quiet confidence, who understood that true authority came from respect, not from fear. 6 months later, the lobby of the Titan Tower felt like a different world. The ambient tension was gone, replaced by a sense of calm professionalism. The new ambassadors at the front desk greeted everyone with a polite and genuine smile. They knew the names of regular tenants. They assisted visitors with directions. They were a source of help, not a source of suspicion. The flickering light in the ceiling had been replaced, part of a building-wide upgrade to a smart lighting system. The elevator hum was gone, its guides precisely calibrated. The building was no longer just a structure. It was a smoothly running organism, and the change had started at its front door. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Arthur Thompson walked through the lobby, dressed once again in jeans and a simple sweater. He was on his way to a meeting, but he paused by the same ficus tree where his confrontation with Leo had taken place. He watched the lead ambassador, a woman named Sarah who was a retired police detective, handle a situation. A man, clearly distressed and confused, was speaking loudly near the elevators. Sarah didn't approach him with aggression. She came around the desk, maintained a safe distance, and spoke in a low, calming voice. "Sir, you seem upset. Is there anything I can do to help? Are you looking for someone?" The man, caught off guard by her kindness, lowered his voice. He explained he was in the wrong building. Sarah smiled, walked him to the door, and gave him clear directions to his actual destination. She treated him with dignity. She solved the problem without ever making it a confrontation. Arthur smiled to himself. This was the change. This was the result. It wasn't just about avoiding another disastrous incident. It was about creating an environment where such an incident was functionally impossible because its root causes, fear, suspicion, and ego, had been systematically eliminated. His work wasn't done, but the foundation was now solid. A foundation built not on marble and steel, but on a simple, profound respect for every person who walked through the doors. He drove on, heading toward his next project, ready to build something new. This story, ending in a quiet victory for civility, forces us to look deeper into the initial conflict. What truly drove Leo Maxwell's actions? It wasn't just a bad day or a simple misunderstanding. It was a manifestation of deep-seated insecurity. For a person like Leo, the uniform wasn't just clothing, it was armor for a fragile ego. The authority it granted was a crutch for a lack of self-worth. He didn't see a man in jeans. He saw a reflection of the ordinary life he was desperate to rise above. Arthur's calm, his intelligence, his refusal to be intimidated, none of it computed. In Leo's world, power was loud and dressed in a suit. Arthur's quiet confidence was a language he didn't speak, and like any animal faced with the unknown, he reacted with aggression. He was trying to bully Arthur not because Arthur was a threat, but because Arthur's very existence challenged Leo's simplistic, fragile worldview. How could this have been different? If Arthur Thompson had immediately flashed a platinum credit card or mentioned a meeting on the 61st floor, Leo likely would have backed down, but the underlying disease would have remained. Leo would have continued to harass others he deemed beneath him. Arthur's patient, methodical approach was crucial. Had he lost his temper and shouted back, he would have descended to Leo's level, turning it into a shouting match that a uniform often wins by default in the eyes of the public. His calm was his shield and his scalpel, allowing him to defend himself while simultaneously dissecting Leo's incompetence for the benefit of the body camera. The lesson here is profound. True power is quiet. It doesn't need to announce itself. The person who needs to shout about their authority is the one who is most unsure they possess it. Arthur's power wasn't in the deed to the building. It was in his unshakable composure, his intellectual precision, and his refusal to have his dignity compromised. He teaches us that the ultimate form of self-defense in a confrontation of egos is not to fight back with more ego, but to operate on a level your aggressor cannot reach. Evelyn's story is a reminder that we must hold the line because if they can do it to a prosecutor, they can do it to anyone. Justice shouldn't depend on who you know or what title you hold. It should be the default. Arthur's story reminds us that dignity isn't determined by the clothes we wear, but by the character we possess. And the responsibility for creating a culture of respect falls on those at the very top. This was a heavy but important story. I want to leave you with a couple of questions. What would you have done in Arthur's shoes? Would you have revealed your identity sooner? And do you think terminating the entire security company was the right call? Or was it an overreaction? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the complexities of human nature. Stay safe out there.